The jungle has a peculiar way of hiding its scars. A massive tree falls, tearing a hole in the canopy, and within months, the undergrowth stitches the green wound shut as if nothing happened. To find the past in the Amazon, you don't just need eyes, you need instinct. It had been 2 weeks since Marcus had fully assumed his post as the sentinel of this land. The patrol routine was sacred. He and Max moved out at 500, mapping every creek, every tapir trail, every blind spot in his sector. Marcus wasn't just hiking, he was memorizing the terrain. A soldier can only defend what he knows. On that day, they had pushed further out than usual, following a dry creek bed that the recent drought had turned into a cracked mud highway. The heat was suffocating, the air stagnant and buzzing with insects. Suddenly, Max stopped. The sable German shepherd, trotting ahead as point man, froze mid-step. His ears, the left one featuring that jagged notch from shrapnel, swiveled toward a dense wall of vines and creepers to the right. The dog didn't growl. He sneezed. A sharp, dry sneeze, the kind a dog makes when a scent irritates the nasal lining. Chemical. A smell that didn't belong to the biology of the forest. Marcus moved up, machete in hand. He saw nothing but a green wall. But he trusted the dog's nose more than his own eyes. Max refused to advance, sitting down and staring fixedly at the vegetation. It was the signal for non-natural material. Marcus swung at the wall of vines. The blade came down hard. Clang. The sound wasn't wood being chopped. It was a metallic, hollow, resonant ring that vibrated all the way up to the bone of Marcus's arm. A funeral gong in the middle of nowhere. He swung again and again, ripping the curtain of leaves. What was revealed wasn't a rock or mining trash. It was aeronautical aluminum, oxidized, stained with moss and slime, but unmistakable. There, swallowed by the earth and the roots of a strangler fig growing over it, was the nose of a twin-engine aircraft. By the rivet design and the shape of the windows, it was vintage military hardware, maybe a C-47 or a modified covert transport from the 70s or 80s. The plane hadn't disintegrated mid-air. It had landed hard, its belly tearing through the trees, shearing off the wings. But the main fuselage remained hauntingly intact, like a sealed coffin. Marcus moved around the structure. The side cargo door was jammed, fused by time and rust. He used the tip of his machete as a pry bar, forcing the gap. The metal groaned, a high-pitched shriek of 50 years of silence being broken. With a final shove of his shoulder, the door gave way, opening a dark maw. The air that drifted out was cold and smelled of stopped time. The smell of old hydraulic fluid, moldy canvas, and bones. Marcus clicked on his tactical light and entered. The beam cut through the darkness of the cargo bay. Olive-drab wooden crates with faded military markings were stacked and secured with rotted cargo nets. But Marcus ignored the payload for now. His training forced him to look for threats, or what remained of them. He advanced toward the cockpit. The bulkhead door was riddled with bullet holes. Holes punched from the outside in. Someone had tried to force their way in. Marcus illuminated the floor of the narrow corridor. A skeleton was there, lying face down, blocking the cockpit entrance. The clothes were synthetic rags that hadn't fully rotted, revealing an empty leather holster on the hip. The skull was fractured, not by impact, but by blunt force trauma. Marcus stepped over the body and shined the light into the flight deck, and that was where he saw the scene that told the true story of Flight 04. The pilot was still there. The skeleton was sitting in the left seat, held upright by the 4-point harness he had never unbuckled. The flight suit was in tatters, but the captain's bars on the shoulders glinted under the flashlight beam. He hadn't died in the crash. The instrument panel in front of him was destroyed, but the skeletal hands still rested on the yoke and the throttle levers, as if he were flying the plane into eternity. Around his neck, hanging over exposed ribs, Stainless steel dog tags reflected Marcus's light. Marcus felt a heaviness in his chest. This wasn't a standard aviation accident. The body in the hallway, the shots in the door, the pilot dying at the controls. This was a crime scene frozen in amber. Max, who had stayed at the cargo door, let out a low whine. The dog didn't want to enter. The smell inside was of ancient death and worse, unstable chemistry. Marcus looked back at the green crates in the rear bay. He moved his light. Under the twisted metal of the co-pilot's seat, Max was focused on something. Not the bones. The dog was sniffing a reinforced metal box, painted a faded orange, almost invisible under the dust of 5 decades. Max looked at Marcus and let out a sharp whine, pawing at the orange box. The cockpit voice recorder, the analog black box. The pilot had died to ensure that plane didn't reach its destination. But why? What was recorded on those magnetic tapes that Max seemed desperate to reveal? And what terrible secret would make a trained man, a specialized officer, choose certain death in a forgotten jungle rather than complete his journey? The answers weren't in the bones. They were in the box Max was protecting. Com certeza. Refinei a transcriação para elevar o nível técnico e a imersão, aplicando o termo bullet ants, mais impactante para o público americano, ajustando a terminologia das insígnias para rank slides e garantindo que o diálogo siga rigorosamente a regra de identificação. Aqui está a versão definitiva e otimizada do Bloco 2, versão USN. The Jungle Sentinel, the 1974 Ghost plane, Block 2. Entering the fuselage of that plane was like stepping into the stomach of a metallic beast, being slowly digested by the jungle. The heat inside was different from the heat outside. It wasn't the humid living steam of the forest. It was a dry, stagnant heat, smelling of oxidized aluminum and rotted fabric. The air felt heavy, thick with the dust of 5 decades of silence. Max stopped at the cargo door. The retired MWD, who would face an armed man without hesitation, refused to take another step. He lowered his ears and let out a subtle whine, his eyes fixed on the darkness of the aircraft's corridor. For the dog's keen sense of smell, this place didn't just smell like ancient death. It smelled like betrayal. Marcus understood. He gave a silent hand signal for the dog to stay on guard at the exit and moved in alone, switching on his tactical flashlight. The beam of light revealed chaos. This hadn't been an organized emergency landing. Cargo crates had broken free from their restraints, smashing against the bulkheads. But Marcus didn't look at the cargo yet. His Tier 1 operator training had taught him that in a crime scene, the bodies tell the story before the physical evidence does. He approached the first skeleton, sprawled in the narrow hallway just behind the cockpit. Marcus knelt, ignoring the massive bullet ants marching over the tattered remains of the uniform. He analyzed the position. The man was face down, arms stretched forward, as if he had been trying to reach the cockpit door when he died. Marcus illuminated the skull. There was a clean entry wound at the back, at the base of the neck. Execution. Someone had shot this man in the back at point-blank range. He didn't die in the crash. He was dead before the plane even hit the trees. Judging by the faded rank slides on the shoulder, he was the co-pilot or the flight engineer. Marcus moved forward, stepping over the body. The cockpit door was closed, but the lock had been blown out by gunfire. The bullets had been fired from the outside in. He pushed the dented metal door. It groaned, revealing the cockpit. Inside, the space was cramped and claustrophobic. Fine roots from a strangler fig had penetrated the seals of the shattered windshield, hanging over the instrument panel like organic cobwebs. There were 2 bodies there. The first, sitting in the left seat, was the pilot. The 4-point harness held him upright, a skeletal sentinel staring at the forest through the grime-streaked glass. Marcus examined the remains. No bullet wounds to the skull or chest. His legs were shattered, pinned under the deformed instrument panel. He had died in the impact, or shortly after, bleeding out alone. But it was the third body that caught Marcus's analytical eye. A man was crumpled on the cockpit floor, wedged between the pedals and the door. Unlike the co-pilot in the hallway, this one had no bullet wounds. His neck was twisted at an unnatural angle. Blunt force trauma. He had been thrown against the panel with extreme violence when the plane hit. In the right hand of this third skeleton, the bony fingers were still locked around a corroded object, a .45 caliber pistol. Marcus reconstructed the scene in his mind. The geometry of violence was clear. The man on the floor, the traitor, had executed the co-pilot in the hallway. Then he stormed the cabin, gun in hand, likely threatening the pilot. But he didn't shoot the pilot. Why? If the goal was to bring the plane down, he would have fired. If he kept the pilot alive, it's because he needed him. He needed the plane to land in a specific location. The pilot was a hostage in his own bird. But something went wrong. The pilot didn't obey. He ditched the plane into the trees. The impact killed the traitor instantly, snapping his neck, while the pilot, strapped in, survived the initial crash, only to die, trapped in the wreckage. Marcus shone his light on the destroyed instrument panel. Amidst the debris, under the empty co-pilot's seat, he saw the characteristic orange glint, the black box, the cockpit voice recorder, CVR. It was an old magnetic tape model, armored against fire and impact. If the tape inside hadn't been eaten by the Amazonian humidity, it would hold the sound of that struggle. It would have the final words. Marcus used his fixed-blade combat knife to pry the recorder's mounts loose. It was heavy. He stowed it in his pack. Before leaving, he illuminated the cargo hold one last time. The green crates. They were military boxes, with no external identification other than serial numbers. He didn't open them. The golden rule for anyone dealing with explosives or unknown materials is, don't touch it until you know what it is. But the smell. There was a chemical, acidic scent leaking from one of the crates that made Marcus's nose burn. Whatever it was unstable. He stepped out of the plane, taking a deep breath of the humid forest air to clear the smell of death from his lungs. The sun was already low, filtering golden and weak through the giant trees. The shadows were growing long. The forest, which had been silent during his investigation, was now beginning to wake up for the night. Max was restless at the door, looking back down the trail. The dog knew they had stayed there too long. The jungle doesn't like those who disturb its dead. Marcus adjusted the pack with the black box on his back. They had the evidence. Now they needed to get back to the cabin before total darkness caught them in the middle of the trail. He took one last look at the moss-covered fuselage. The plane looked like a wounded animal, hiding its secret. Marcus whispered, "Let's go, Max. Let's hear what they have to say." The walk back always feels longer than the walk in, especially when you are carrying the weight of 50 years of death on your back. The orange box inside Marcus's rucksack didn't weigh more than 10 pounds, but it felt like it was pulling him into the earth, as if the gravity around that object was heavier. The sun had already given up the fight against the canopy. The golden light of the afternoon gave way to that bruised, dusty blue that precedes total darkness. In the Amazon, this moment is called the mouth of night. It is the hour when human vision fails, tricked by shadows that stretch and seem to move on their own. Marcus picked up the pace. He knew the basic rule of jungle survival. You don't want to be on the trail when the big cats wake up. But it wasn't jaguars he was worried about right now. His mind, conditioned by years of urban warfare and desert ambushes, began to play tricks on him. Snap. A dry branch cracked behind him, to his left. Marcus stopped instantly, pivoting on his heel, the shotgun snapping up to the low-ready position. He swept the tree line with his eyes. Nothing. Just ferns swaying in the light breeze. "Max?" Marcus whispered to his partner. The dog was standing 3 yards ahead, looking back. Max wasn't growling. He was just watching, ears pricked forward. If it were a human, Max would have given the alert signal. If it were nothing, he would have kept walking. The fact that he stopped meant something was there. They continued. But the sensation of being followed didn't fade. Marcus felt that prickle on the back of his neck, the pressure of invisible eyes on his spine. He started thinking about the plane. If that transport was secret, if the cargo was valuable or dangerous enough to cause a mutiny on board, was someone still looking for it? Were there watchers in the woods, guardians of that tomb, waiting for someone to break the seal? Marcus's breathing grew shallow. The tremor in his right hand returned, faint, making the sling of his weapon vibrate against his chest. He wasn't afraid of ghosts. He was afraid of ambush teams. He saw shapes in his peripheral vision, human forms that dissolved into tree trunks when he looked directly at them. Suddenly, Max stopped abruptly at a bend in the trail, where the vegetation closed in to form a dark green tunnel. The dog didn't just stop. He locked up. The fur on his neck rose into an aggressive ridge. He let out a sound Marcus rarely heard. Not a bark, but a sharp exhale through his nose, followed by a guttural, deep growl that seemed to vibrate from the ground itself. Marcus clicked on his tactical light. The white beam cut through the darkness of the vegetable tunnel. Up ahead, about 15 yards away, 2 points of light shined back. They weren't tactical flashlights. They were eyes, yellow, cold, reflecting the beam with a hypnotic intensity. They were eyes that didn't blink, and they were low, at the height of a man's waist. Marcus disengaged the safety on the shotgun. A scout crouching, a camouflaged enemy. "Who's there?" Marcus shouted, his raspy voice cracking the silence of the forest. The shadow moved. It didn't retreat in fear, nor did it charge in anger. It simply revealed itself. A jaguar, massive, the rosette patterns of its fur rolling over thick muscle, stepped out from the cover of the leaves and stood in the middle of the trail. It was huge, the apex predator of this ecosystem. The cat looked directly at Marcus, then at Max. There was no fear in its eyes. There was only recognition. It was saying, "You are in my backyard." Max, who would attack any gunman to protect Marcus, held his position, but did not advance. There is an ancestral respect between top-tier predators. The dog knew that this fight was not necessary. For 5 eternal seconds, man, dog, and cat remained frozen in a silent Mexican standoff. Then, with a fluid, silent movement that seemed to defy physics for an animal of that size, the jaguar turned its head, lost interest, and vanished into the thick bush without making a single sound. Not even a leaf rustled. Marcus exhaled the air he didn't know he was holding. His legs shook for a second. It wasn't a human. It wasn't the cartel or ghosts from the past. It was just the jungle being the jungle. "Let's move, buddy," Marcus said to the dog, "before she changes her mind." They jogged the rest of the way, when the silhouette of the stilt house appeared in the clearing, lit by the weak moon. It looked like a safe castle. Marcus climbed the stairs, entered, and locked the door, securing the 2 iron bolts he had installed himself. He was safe. The world outside, the jaguars, the dead, the bush, had been left behind. But he had brought a piece of that world inside. He took the rucksack off his back and placed it on the rough wooden table. He unzipped it. The orange box, dirty with earth and time, gleamed under the light of the gas lantern. The scare on the trail had cleared his mind. The adrenaline had washed away the fatigue. Now, only cold, technical curiosity remained. Marcus looked at his tools on the makeshift workbench: precision screwdrivers, electrical wires, a multimeter, and isopropyl alcohol. Outside, the night belonged to the beasts. But inside, the night would belong to the dead. He was going to make that machine speak, whatever the cost. The rough wooden table in the kitchen, which usually served only to clean fish or hold a coffee cup, now looked like a bomb disposal technician's workbench. Under the harsh, surgical glare of the tactical lantern hanging from the ceiling, the orange box, the cockpit voice recorder, Model Mars CVR-30, sat like a vital organ extracted from a giant beast. Marcus knew he had only one shot at this. The reel-to-reel magnetic tape inside, made of acetate and iron oxide, had been baking in the Amazon heat and freezing in the rain-soaked nights for 50 years. It was dry. It was brittle. If the recorder's motor kicked in with too much torque, the tape would snap. If the reed heads were dirty, the sound would be nothing but static. If the voltage was wrong, the circuits would fry, taking the truth with them to the grave. He began the cleaning process. With the patience of a watchmaker, Marcus used a cotton swab dipped in 90% isopropyl alcohol to clean the magnetic red head. The cotton came away black, coated in soot and oxidation. He repeated the process, once, twice, 5 times, until the cotton came away clean. Max, lying under the table, sighed with every movement Marcus made, sensing the electric tension in the air, but maintaining the discipline not to bump the table. The next problem was power. The aircraft system ran on 28 volts DC, the standard for military aviation. The battery bank Marcus had rigged for his water pump and solar lights was 12 volts. Hooking up just one wouldn't move the heavy motor. Hooking it into the generator's AC outlet would blow the capacitors. The solution was physical. Marcus stripped some copper wire using his teeth. He connected 2 12-volt motorcycle batteries in a series circuit, summing the voltage to create 24 volts. It wasn't perfect. The motor would run slightly slower than spec, making the voices sound a bit deeper, a bit more ghostly. But it would work. To compensate for the amperage and prevent a current spike, he improvised a fuse using a single thin filament of steel wool between the contacts. If something went wrong, the wire would melt before the recorder did. The smell of ozone and hot metal filled the kitchen when he touched the wires to the terminals. A blue spark snapped. Max lifted his head, ears swiveling forward. The recorder made a mechanical clack sound. The solenoid engaged. Slowly, painfully, the metal reels began to turn. Whirr. Click. Whirr. The brown tape, fragile as a butterfly's wing, pulled tight and began to pass over the red head. Marcus plugged in the headset he used for operating the chainsaw, adapted for the radio jack. He closed his eyes. His right hand hovered over the stop button, ready to abort if the tape started to bunch up or tear. The sound began. First, just the hiss, a white noise, loud and constant, like a distant waterfall. Shh. Marcus adjusted the gain. The hiss receded. And then, coming from 1974, the sound of the engines filled the headphones. A deep, continuous, hypnotic drone. The sound of twin propellers cutting through the air at cruising speed. The fidelity was frightening. Marcus could almost feel the vibration of the aluminum panels. "Coffee is cold, Lieutenant." The voice was raspy, mature. The pilot, Captain Helio. He sounded calm, bored even. "Better than nothing, Captain. In the jungle, we drink mud if we have to." A second voice replied, younger, lighter. The co-pilot. "Hey, Guerra." The captain called out to someone in the back of the plane. "Is the engineer sleeping or dead back there?" "Checking oil pressure on number 2, Captain. It's fluctuating a bit, but within the envelope." A third voice answered over the intercom. The flight engineer. Marcus glanced at his watch. The tape loop was 30 minutes long. He was listening to the very end of the flight. The conversation drifted on for long minutes. Banal, human. They talked about the heat. The co-pilot, Lieutenant Silva, talked about his fiancée waiting in the city of Belém. He told the captain he was going to buy a Volkswagen Beetle. The captain laughed, his voice crackling with static, saying a beetle on dirt roads was just asking for back pain. It was the normalcy that made it macabre. Marcus saw the skeletons in his mind, young Silva, who never married, who never bought the car. They were flying toward their deaths, discussing soccer and mechanics. Max began to get restless. The dog stood up and pressed his muzzle against Marcus's leg, letting out a low whine. He could hear the sound leaking from the headphones. He felt the shift in the frequency of the voices before Marcus even parsed the words. On the tape, the ambient sound changed. There was the heavy clank of a metal bulkhead door opening in the rear of the aircraft. Heavy boots on the metal deck. "Hey, what are you doing up front?" The flight engineer's voice sounded surprised. "Cargo area is restricted. Return to your seat." Silence, just the drone of the engines. "I said return to your seat, Sergeant. You can't—" The sound that followed was dry, muffled, almost inaudible if Marcus hadn't been listening for it. Pft, pft. 2 spits, suppressed gunfire. Then the sound of a heavy body dropping, hitting the aluminum fuselage with a dull thud, followed by the rhythmic stomp of boots advancing toward the cockpit. In the recording, the chatter stopped. "Guerra! What was that?" The captain's voice switched from boredom to condition red in a millisecond. "Silva, lock the door," the captain shouted. Too late. The sound of the cockpit door being kicked in exploded from the speaker. Marcus jumped in his chair. Max barked at the empty air, the fur on his neck standing straight up. "Hands up. Hands off the radio." A fourth voice spoke. Cold, controlled, no regional accent. The traitor, the extra passenger. "What is this? Where is Guerra?" Co-pilot Silva shouted, his voice trembling with panic. "Guerra has been dismissed, and you will be too if you touch that yoke." The traitor replied calmly. Marcus visualized the scene, the tiny space. The traitor standing in the doorway, weapon drawn. The pilot and co-pilot strapped into their seats, backs to the aggressor, utterly vulnerable. "What's the play, son?" Captain Helio's voice went ice cold. It was the voice of command. "You want to divert? Cuba, Colombia, we have fuel." "We aren't going to Cuba, Captain. We are going to the capital. Change heading 040. The traitor ordered. A pause, the rustle of paper, a map being unfolded. 040? The captain hesitated. "That's the city center. That's the Palace District. There's no airstrip there." "I know," the traitor said. The silence on the tape was absolute for 3 seconds. Marcus felt cold sweat trickle down his spine. The objective wasn't to land. "You're insane," the co-pilot whispered. "You want to crash the plane?" "Shut up! Captain, turn this ship now!" The traitor screamed. "The cargo!" The captain spoke slowly, as if assembling a mental puzzle while buying time. "The green crates. The manifest said artillery parts. But they aren't parts, are they?" The traitor laughed, a dry, metallic sound that chilled Marcus's blood. "Let's call it a gift package. 10 crates of enriched Soviet C4, enough to open a crater where the palace stands today. It's going to be a beautiful show. And the blame will fall on the rebels. The government needs a martyr, Captain. And congratulations, you've just been promoted to posthumous national hero." Explosives. A false flag attack, killing thousands of civilians and government officials in the heart of the country to justify a regime crackdown or a war. The magnitude of the crime made Marcus's stomach turn. Those men 50 years ago were flying on top of a tactical nuclear bomb made of plastic. "I won't do it," the captain said, firm. "You will, or I kill the kid," the traitor hissed. The sound of a revolver hammer being cocked, the scrape of metal against someone's temple. "Captain," the co-pilot whimpered. "Please, turn the plane," the traitor screamed. "No," the captain said. Bang! The gunshot was deafening inside the closed cockpit. It wasn't suppressed. It was raw. The wet sound of impact, a gasp cut in half, and the sound of Lieutenant Silva's body slumping over the instrument panel. The stall warning began to blare in the background, a frantic beep, 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 indicating the dead body was pushing the yoke forward. "You bastard!" the captain roared. Sounds of a struggle. The captain must have been trying to release his harness, turn in the seat, fight in that confined phone booth of a cockpit. "Sit, sit, and fly!" The traitor was screaming now, breathless. "You're alone now, old man. Turn this shit around or I blow your brains out and fly it myself." "You can't fly this tub." The captain was panting, his voice thick with pain and hate. "You need me. I need you alive for 20 more minutes, then you're garbage," the traitor replied. Marcus listened, paralyzed. He could imagine Captain Helio, his co-pilot's blood spattered on his uniform, looking at the instruments, looking at the endless jungle below, knowing there was no way out. If he obeyed, he murdered thousands. If he resisted, he took a bullet to the head, and the traitor might, just might, manage to guide the plane to the urban area and cause a disaster anyway. There was only one option, the option of sacrifice. The sound of the engines changed. The steady drone turned into a high-pitched scream, RPMs maxing out. "What are you doing?" the traitor shouted, voice shaking from the vibration of the airframe. "Why are we descending?" "Rich mixture, propeller pitch locked," the captain said, his voice strangely calm now, the voice of a man who has accepted his fate. "We're going down. Pull up now," the traitor shrieked. "Too late. I cut the hydraulics. We have no elevators." The captain lied. It was a lie. Marcus knew it was a lie. The captain was diving on purpose. He was driving the plane into the jungle canopy to ensure the bomb detonated in the middle of nowhere, killing only the two of them. "You son of a—" the traitor began. Gunshots. 1, 2, 3 rapid fires. The traitor shooting in panic, glass breaking. Ricochets pinging off metal. The captain grunted in pain. A guttural sound. But he didn't let go of the controls. Hold it steady." The captain was whispering to himself, or maybe to God. The sound of the wind increased to a howl. The ground proximity warning system began to scream, "Terrain, terrain, pull up. You're gonna kill us." The traitor was screaming, voice cracking into a hysterical shriek. The sound of someone trying to run, stumbling, falling. The traitor being thrown against the dashboard by the G-force of the dive, the sound of bones snapping. And then, in the final seconds, Captain Helio spoke his last message. Not to the traitor, not to the radio. He spoke to the orange box that was recording it all. "Payload neutralized. Nobody hurts my people today. Tell Maria that I—" The final sound wasn't an explosion. It was the sound of nature's violence meeting man's violence. The tearing of metal, the snap of massive trees shattering like toothpicks, the earth receiving the impact. And then, static. Shh. The tape continued to spin on the shack's table, the white hiss filling the silence of the night. Marcus didn't move for a long time. He felt cold sweat running down his back. His hands were gripping the edge of the table so hard his knuckles were white. Max, by his side, let out a long, mournful sigh, resting his head on the floor. The pilot hadn't just died. He had fought an entire war inside a 2-meter square cockpit. He had saved a city, and the cargo. Marcus looked out into the darkness, toward where the plane rested. 10 crates of C4, with detonators. The murder weapon was still there, intact, waiting. Captain Helio had stopped it from reaching the city, but he hadn't been able to disarm it. That pilot's mission ended in 1974. But the mission to clean up the mess, that had just begun for Marcus. Knowing the truth changes the landscape. When Marcus and Max hiked back along the dark trail toward the plane, the trees no longer looked like mere vegetation. They looked like silent witnesses to a 50-year-old crime. And the aluminum fuselage, which before had been just a curious wreck, now pulsed in Marcus's mind like a reactor core on the verge of a meltdown. He wasn't returning to an accident scene. He was returning to defuse a bomb that had been ticking for half a century. Upon reaching the makeshift clearing, Marcus didn't waste time. The storm had passed, leaving behind a rhythmic, irritating dripping from the canopy. He ordered Max to hold position 50 yards out, behind the thick trunk of a massive kapok tree. If Marcus made a mistake inside that fuselage, he didn't want his dog to be collateral damage. Max obeyed, sitting in the mud, but his eyes never left his handler. Marcus entered the cargo bay. The chemical smell was stronger now, or maybe it was just his conscience knowing what was there. He shined his light on the green crates. 10 reinforced wooden boxes, lids nailed shut. He used the tip of his combat knife to pry open the first box, moving with the slowness of a sloth. The rotten wood gave way without a sound. Inside, wrapped in wax paper, were the bricks. C4, military plastic explosive. Stable, moldable, safe against shock and fire. In theory, but chemistry is a fickle mistress. Over time, binders degrade, stabilizers evaporate. And the worst part wasn't the explosive mass, it was the initiators. Marcus found the attached accessory box. Chemical time delay detonators and electric blasting caps. These were the danger. The humidity had corroded the copper contacts, creating a green crust of verdigris. If the corrosion had penetrated the capsule, the mercury fulminate inside could have crystallized. If that happened, they were basically touch-sensitive. A vibration, a drop of sweat, a stiff breeze could set off the chain reaction. Marcus took a deep breath, activating his tactical tunnel vision. The world outside vanished. There was no jungle, no jaguar, no past, no future. There were only the wires and the capsules. Using surgical forceps he kept in his trauma kit, he began to separate the detonators from the charge blocks. His hands, calloused and scarred, moved with a frightening lightness. The neurological tremor, that ghost that haunted him in moments of peace, disappeared completely. In the face of mortal danger, Marcus's body remembered how to be perfect. One by one, he removed the blasting caps. He placed them with extreme care into a glass jar he had brought, filled with diesel fuel, an old field trick to stabilize corrosion and prevent sparks. The blocks of C4, now rendered harmless without the ignition source, were stacked to the side. Marcus looked at that pile of gray putty. There was enough potential energy there to bring down a mountain, but in the pragmatic mind of the ex-SEAL, that ceased to be a threat and became a resource. C4 burns hot and slow if you just light it with a match, without the shockwave of a cap. It was the perfect fuel for starting fires in wet wood. It was an engineering tool for blasting irrigation ditches or removing tree stumps if he could fabricate new, safe detonators in the future. He wasn't going to destroy the payload. He was going to recycle it. In the jungle, nothing is wasted. After neutralizing the main charge, Marcus began to strip the plane. He pulled yards of copper wiring from the fuselage, excellent for snares and repairs at the shack. He pulled the old batteries, pure lead, aluminum panels to patch his roof, and even the stainless steel bolts that hadn't rusted. Captain Helio's plane would continue to serve, but now as an organ donor for the Sentinel's survival. Finally, the heaviest task remained, the human task. Marcus walked to the corridor where the skeleton of the traitor lay. The bones were scattered, mixed with the remains of civilian clothes and the empty holster. Marcus looked at that pile of calcium with cold detachment. That man had killed his brothers in arms for ideology or money, and he had died in fear, screaming as the plane fell. Marcus kicked the bones into the corner, away from the walkway. "You stay here," he muttered. "The tin can is your coffin." He stepped over the traitor and entered the cockpit. Captain Helio was still there, sitting, the eternal watchman. Decomposition had done its full work. There was no skin, just clean bones scrubbed white by ants and time, held together by the synthetic flight suit and the harness he had never unbuckled. Marcus released the buckles. The bones slid gently, the human shape collapsing after holding its form for 50 years. With solemn respect, Marcus gathered every part: the skull, the ribs, the broken femurs. He folded what remained of the flight suit with the captain's bars and placed everything inside a heavy canvas duffel bag. Last, he took the dog tags. The ball chains were rusted solid, but the steel plates shone. Helio MSO, positive Catholic. Marcus held the tags in his closed fist. They were cold, but they felt like they were burning. He exited the plane carrying the bag with the hero's remains and the rucksack full of disarmed C4. Max met him at the exit, sniffing the canvas bag and letting out a low, sad, respectful whine. The dog knew what they were carrying. It wasn't cargo. It was honor. The day was breaking. The morning mist covered the forest floor like a white shroud. Marcus chose the spot. It wouldn't be here, near the wreckage and the traitor. It would be on the highest point of the terrain, facing the sunrise, where the light hit first. Captain Helio had landed in hell to save the sky. Now it was time for him to rest. The hike from the crash site to the spot Marcus had chosen wasn't long in distance, but it was immense in meaning. He carried the canvas bag with Captain Helio's remains over his left shoulder, close to his heart, not as dead weight, but as if he were carrying a wounded brother off the battlefield. Max walked by his side. No running, no sniffing at random trails. The dog kept a cadenced pace, head high, flanking his handler like a silent honor guard of one. Marcus chose a high point, a natural rise where the canopy opened slightly, allowing the sunlight to touch the ground for longer than in the perpetual twilight of the undergrowth. From there, if the bush were cleared, one could see the infinite sky that Captain Helio had loved so much, and which, in his final act of bravery, he had traded for the darkness of the earth to save the innocent. Marcus dropped the rucksack containing the explosives and tools. He grabbed the folding entrenching tool, E-tool, he always carried. The Amazon soil is deceptive. It looks soft because of the humus and dead leaves on the surface, but just beneath lies an interlocking web of roots, hard as steel cables, compacted clay and rock. Digging here is a war against the biology of the forest itself. The sound of the shovel hitting the earth broke the morning silence. Thump, scrape, thump. Marcus dug. Sweat began to pour down his face, stinging his eyes, gluing his tactical shirt to his back. The sun climbed, the heat spiked, turning the clearing into a sauna. But he didn't stop. The tremor in his hand, which sometimes haunted him in the quiet of the shack, didn't exist now. There was only the rhythm of the work. Digging a grave is one of humanity's oldest acts, and for a soldier, it is the final service rendered to one who fell beside you. He dug deep. Deep enough that the armadillos wouldn't reach. Deep enough that the roots would take time to disturb the pilot's sleep. When the grave reached 4 feet, Marcus stopped. He was exhausted, muscles burning, breath heavy, but he felt a mental clarity he hadn't felt in years. The physical pain of the labor silenced the psychological pain of memory. He climbed out of the pit and picked up the canvas bag. With gentle, almost reverent movements, he deposited the bones at the bottom of the red earth. He arranged what remained of the flight suit over the skeleton, aligning the corroded shoulder bars. The captain wouldn't be buried as a pile of bones. He would be buried as an officer. Marcus took off his cap and held it against his chest. Max sat at the edge of the grave, looking down, and let out a long, sad sigh, the sound of a creature that understands the finality of death. Captain Helio. Marcus's voice came out raspy, scratched, echoing strangely in the clearing. He didn't know how to pray. Not anymore. Prayers had been left behind in some dirty alley in the Middle East, where he saw things God should have prevented. So, he spoke soldier to soldier. The payload is neutralized. The target was saved. You completed the mission, sir. Nobody knows what you did. There will be no medal, no parade, no street named after you. But the jungle knows. And now, I know. He paused, looking into the void of the earth. You held the line alone for 50 years. I'll take the watch from here. Stand down, Captain. Marcus began to cover the body. The sound of dirt falling onto the canvas was muffled and final. When the grave was level with the ground, he didn't stop. He fetched large river stones from the dry creek bed nearby and built a cairn, a pile of stones over the mound to mark the site and protect it from scavengers. He needed a marker. Marcus took 2 thick branches of ironwood, a hardwood that lasts for centuries, and lashed them into a cross, using the copper wiring he had stripped from the plane itself. A poetic connection between the man and his machine. He planted the cross at the head of the stones. Then, he took the dog tags from his pocket, the ID plates. He wiped the dirt from the metal with his thumb, revealing the name stamped in relief. He hung the chain on the cross. The metal gleamed under a sunbeam that pierced the leaves at that exact moment. It wasn't gold, but it shone with a dignity that no gold could buy. Marcus stood at attention and saluted. A slow, perfect, rigid movement. Hand to brow, spine straight, eyes fixed on the horizon. Max, beside him, remained static, like a statue of granite and fur. They stood there for a long time, letting the jungle breeze dry the sweat. Marcus felt a weight lift from his shoulders. By burying this man, he felt he had buried a few of his own ghosts. He couldn't save the friends he lost in the teams. He couldn't go back in time and stop the IED that took him out of the fight. But he could save this pilot's memory. That would have to be enough. The walk back to the shack was different. Marcus's rucksack was heavy with the disarmed C4 and the useful scrap, but his steps were light. The jungle, which before had seemed like a hostile maze full of invisible threats, now felt familiar. He knew its dead. He knew its history. He wasn't an invader trying to survive anymore. He was the keeper of a secret. When they reached the stilt house, the midday sun was punishing the tin roof. The house was still old, crooked, and full of drafts. But now it was an arsenal and a base. Marcus unloaded the C4 into a dry, secure cache he had prepared away from the main house. It wasn't a weapon of terror anymore. It was a tool. It was the fire he would use if the darkness tried to swallow them again. He placed the black box, now silent, on a high shelf next to the radio he had found in the first adventure. They were his trophies. Not of hunting, but of truth. Marcus sat on the porch, scraping the mud off his boots. Max lay down at his feet, closing his eyes, finally relaxed. The dog knew the work was done. Marcus opened the pilot's logbook, which he had rescued along with the black box. The pages were yellowed, brittle. He began to read, not about the final flight, but about the previous ones. There were coordinates. There were mentions of strange lights in the northern sector. There were reports of uncontacted tribes and stone ruins seen from the air, which didn't appear on any map. Captain Halio had seen a lot from up there, and he had written it all down. Marcus ran his finger over a coordinate circled in red ink, with a handwritten note. The boiling river, do not approach. A thin, almost imperceptible smile appeared on the corner of Marcus's mouth, pulling at the scar on his neck. He thought he had come to the Amazon to die in silence, but the Amazon had other plans. It didn't want his death. It wanted his vigilance. He looked at the dense bush surrounding his clearing. The plane was there, hidden, digesting the traitor. The grave was there, shining in the sun. And how many other secrets, How many other planes, lost cities, or forgotten crimes were hidden under that infinite green blanket? Marcus closed the book. "You rest now, Max," he said, stroking the dog's head. "Because tomorrow, we check those northern coordinates." The Sentinel didn't just have a house to protect. He had an entire territory to discover. And for the first time in years, the ex-Navy SEAL didn't feel the tremor in his hand. He felt only the steadiness of a man with a purpose. The war was over, but the adventure was eternal. Outro, call to action, narrator. The jungle keeps what man forgets. Marcus gave peace to a hero of the past, but in doing so, he woke up the future. The pilot's logbook is full of paths that don't show up on GPS, and each one leads to a new mystery. What are the lights in the north sector? What did the pilot see that made him circle that area in red? If you want to continue on this patrol with Marcus and Max, if you want to see what else is buried in the mud and history, your mission is simple. Subscribe to the channel and activate the bell. The forest is vast, and we are just beginning to explore it. Leave a comment. What would you do with the logbook? The next coordinate has been marked. We'll see you there.